While we're waiting, I can ask: is there a Ms.Pakman?
Of course there is. Yeah, I had no clue what was going on. I had a lot to catch up on when I got back, but a lot of stuff happened, but nothing really changed.
Yeah, that's pretty much the news cycle. I guess I know I have you for limited time, so I want to use it as crucially as possible. So I was thinking for maybe about 45 minutes we'll talk about Tim Pool, and then maybe for the last 5 we'll open it up to some audience questions.
Oh, okay, all right. I didn't know Tim Pool was going to be a focus.
No, I'm just joking. Can you tell me a little bit again about we were talking about Tim Pool's interview, and I asked whether or not that was a debate or an interview, or how you saw it.
Oh yeah. I saw it as a conversation where when we disagreed, I pointed it out. I don't know. I mean, I got some people emailed me and they were like, awesome debate. And other people were like, you should have made it a debate.
What did you think about that part, though? And I want to get your thoughts on this, on the idea of tech censoring the left in particular, because I hear that a lot out of Tim Pool. Right, that tech giants.
Yeah, I just don't have any reason to believe that that's the case. I mean, what I've experienced and what I've seen is that there's basically, I mean, first of all, it's not even really censorship. Like, most of what's going on is just demonetization of political content,
right,
and deprioritization of independent political content. Mm-hmm. And I've seen no partisan sort of like bias. It's just been, if you're on the right, you probably know more people on the right. So you're in an echo chamber where it's mostly right wingers saying we're getting crushed. And if you're on the left, you probably know more people on the left. And it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah. And like, I haven't seen any kind of demonstrable data or a study that reflects that. And if there was, I'm sure Tim Pool would be tattooing it to his forehead, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, I know that, like, I don't really watch his channel or follow his tweets too much. And I'm guessing that he's probably more provocative in those than in when he just sends me a message, because we'll talk privately sometimes. But in my private conversations with him, and I hope I'm not exposing some like hypocrisy, or I hope I'm not exposing anything he doesn't want known. But in my conversations with him, he basically is talking about this not as a partisan thing. So I don't know exactly what he's saying publicly. You may know more than I do.
Yes, I follow him on Twitter quite a bit. It's inflammatory, to say the least.
Okay, that's fair.
But I find that with most people in private conversations and DMs, they're a lot more pleasant, obviously, than their online personas.
Yes.
How have you found the entire demonetization process of YouTube? Because I mean, you have been pretty vocal about it on your show. Is that one of the main reasons you moved over to the Twitch?
Well, I mean, Twitch was more of a diversification move. I made a Twitch account months ago, and just like nothing happened where I was like, okay, now is a good point to just start doing stuff on Twitch, until CNN shut down my live debate coverage a month and a half ago. And so it was like, okay, tonight I can't stream on YouTube. I'm going to go to Twitch right now. And then basically it started with that. And it's a good thing. I mean, I've been meaning to get on Twitch regardless, and I'm streaming in a couple hours tonight on Twitch, and the community's awesome. And like, it's worked out great in that sense.
Yeah.
But, I think that the way it's all going is, and Susan Wojcicki, or however she pronounces her last name, just put out a letter basically reinforcing what I've been saying for months, which is YouTube is going to prioritize legacy corporate news and politics content. It's what's safe for them. It's there's every advantage to doing it, and that's what they're going to keep doing. So people like me and you and other people kind of in our circles, we're going to have to work around it rather than with it, because that's just the reality.
I think we get a pass sometimes because we're kind of like goofy comedians, or at least that's kind of the brand that we've cultivated. So there are times when I find I'll release a story, and then you and Kyle Kalinske will do the exact same thing. You guys get demonetized, but because mine has the word penis in it multiple times, it stays on. Well, actually, okay, maybe penis is wrong, but something else that isn't, maybe TOS-y, they will keep it on.
That may be. Yeah. I mean, like, we just did a long form piece about just like regulation of social media. And it seems to be that if you're really big, like in the top 0.1% on YouTube, there's special rules altogether because you're working more directly with the advertisers. If you're in the top 1 to 5%, you don't get those benefits, but there's just a lot of attention on you. And then there's a whole bunch of other people that just seem to basically be floating by under the radar. Yeah.
How have you found the whole boomer gaslighting on Twitch?
Because I don't even know what it means.
Okay. that's the boomerist answer of all.
People show up and they just post boomer when I'm streaming, and like I just ignore it. I mean, I just don't even know. Explain it to me. Like, what does it mean? Just that I'm old or something?
No. Well, yeah. I mean, that goes along with it. I mean, obviously, you know that there's the generational gaps, and boomers would be defined as, you know, basically the children of the post World War II era. But on the internet, it usually means that you're having kind of a simple moment, shall we say, a moment in which you're screwing up or something like that, and then they say you're boomering out. That's what the kids like to call it.
I mean, listen, here's my approach on Twitch has been, I want to learn what the culture is. And I've been ingratiating myself with the, as many people on Twitch as I can. Yes. But if there's some weird thing that I don't understand, there's like a 5% chance it's a horribly racist thing. So I just don't call attention to it until I know what it is.
Fair enough. Well, I can tell you, boomer is a term of endearment, and it's also it's not a dog whistle. It's pretty safe. Yeah. You're okay there.
Good to know.
Are you going to move on to doing Twitch exclusively eventually? Or are you going to keep your YouTube show as well? I mean, I know you're going to keep your channel, obviously, but I mean your live YouTube show.
Yeah, I plan on doing both. I did a YouTube stream last night, and I'm doing a Twitch stream tonight, and I'll keep doing, to the extent that both keep growing and both generate revenue and both are communities that are good to engage with. I'll keep doing both.
So I first discovered you probably a couple years ago when I was trying to find leftist content on YouTube, and you were amongst a very small minority of basically secularists who didn't intentionally vilify the Islamic community or weren't Islamophobic that I could find on YouTube, right? Because I found the problem with the whole atheist movement on YouTube usually would come with a pretty large breadth of Islamophobia. And I'm curious, was that something you were ever conscious of? I mean, did you evolve as one of the big fans of the four horsemen of the apocalypse kind of thing?
No, I never, I mean, listen, I followed them and I consumed their material, but I was never, you know, like I never considered myself an acolyte of Hitchens or Dawkins or anything like that. It's interesting you say that though, because so you found that I, unlike some of those in the prominent atheist community, I did not strike you as Islamophobic. There's also an entire other community who says that I am Islamophobic, but not by virtue of being part of that atheist community, by virtue of being Jewish. And so it's interesting that you came away with a different impression. I mean, listen, in the end, it's just like, I call it like it is. I try to judge people individually, but at the same time, I'm not afraid to recognize when there are belief structures that tend towards certain problematic beliefs, if that's the case. And I basically just call it like I see it. That's all I try to do.
Right, but like I would differentiate you from someone like, say, Sam Harris, because you're not constantly vilifying like Muslims, right? I don't get that from you.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Wait till you hear my podcast coming out next week. Was your journey always on YouTube? Did you start out there, or did you come from other mass media? Because I know you have a background in economics, right?
Yeah, I started on community radio and then went to an audio podcast and then syndicated the community radio hour and then eventually turned it into a TV show that is on satellite TV, still on Free Speech TV, DirecTV, and Dish Network. And then the YouTube channel kind of started concurrent with when the video stuff started. So no, the YouTube channel started really, really slowly, actually. I think our first year, we only had like 5,000 subscribers after the first full year on YouTube, maybe closer to 10 or something like that. And then over time, it just has continued to grow and grow, fortunately.
Yeah, no, that's great. What do you see as kind of like some of the worst figures on the other spectrum on the YouTube? Like, between like, you know, your Steven Crowders all the way to your Stefan Molyneux and you know, Sargons. Yeah.
I don't know. I hate to rank. They're all bad in their unique ways. So I hate to rank them, so to speak. But I think that definitely there is, I mean, it depends on like which category, but I think that there's bad faith actors and then there's people who I think are just wrong on issues. And I try to at least distinguish a little bit. And I don't know exactly who fits into which category, but Molyneux is truly horrible. Sargon, I don't know if I'm just, I mean, listen, like I watch very little. I watch like no left-wing stuff because I have so much other stuff to read and be informed about that I find it usually not that useful to watch other people doing similar things to what I do. And I only watch right-wing stuff when someone puts it in front of me and says, you've got to comment on this specific thing. So it's hard for me to really evaluate in that sort of general sense, but I'm feeling like Sargon has lost relevance over the last year. Like I never hear about the guy anymore.
Well, he had that political run for a while.
Yes.
And then before you came on, we were actually watching him on Infowars because he was on Infowars today. So
no way.
It's come full circle.
Where can so okay? So let me ask. That's something I may want to actually watch on my Twitch stream tonight.
I'll send you the link.
Will I? Is there any Twitch rule I would be breaking by playing Infowars on my Twitch stream?
So, and obviously my chat's going to correct me in real time on this, but basically what it comes down to is that there are certain things that are against terms of service. So there are individuals, like right now, Hassan is banned from Twitch for 7 days for his 9/11 comments, for example. So,
is that right? I didn't realize that.
Yes. So if you were to show, if you were to bring Hassan on your show, or you were to call Hassan and put that on your show, that'll get you, banned as well. But if you are to watch a video of Hassan and critique it, right, that's fine, and in my opinion is necessary. Otherwise, how do we speak about the news? Like, I'm sure Alex Jones is banned from Twitch unilaterally. I'm pretty sure that's got to be a thing, right? But at the same time, I should be allowed to watch and comment over him. I would hope so. Otherwise, it really limits your ability to critique media.
Yeah. So you're saying it sounds like I would be okay playing it on.
I was playing it for the last 40 minutes, and my stream's still running. So I mean,
I'm going to make a note of that because that actually sounds like an. I'm not crazy it got, but Sargon on Infowars. It's the first time I've been interested in Sargon in like a year. So that actually.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. Can I get your thoughts on the whole Andy No thing, especially with the revelations that occurred yesterday?
Oh, I just did it literally a half hour ago. I published a video to my YouTube channel about this. And so I kind of hesitated to say more at the beginning when in June he was, attacked and milkshaked, other than when people would call my show and ask me about it, I would say, I'm against the violence. I don't think people should punch him. I don't think people should throw milkshakes at him. But it very quickly started to get weird where like, okay, he claimed that the milkshakes had concrete and then like there was no evidence of that.
Yeah.
And then I know that this seems like a minor thing, but I really didn't understand that British accent because like he's American and 3 years ago he spoke with an American accent and then like now he speaks with a British accent. That was just weird.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. Yeah.
Then, he claimed that Antifa attacked right-wingers with hammers. And then very quickly the video came out showing it was the right-wingers attacking Antifa with hammers. Yeah. And then he tweeted, oh, it was self-defense. And it's like, well, what? That's the opposite.
That's journalism, David. Don't you know? He was doing journalism.
He was doing journalism. Yeah. And then now this new thing where, he was commiserating with right-wingers who were planning violence. He said nothing about it. So my take is like, this is a bad faith actor. Yeah. He probably has a lot of personal stuff going on and it could, without needing to psychoanalyze it or using that to excuse anything that the guy has done. Okay. He seems like a troubled guy as well, but he seems like a bad faith actor.
Oh, absolutely. And he got fired from Quillette, right?
Yeah, and I saw that Quillette said, even though they announced it the day after this thing broke about how he was commiserating with the right-wingers who were planning violence and didn't mention it, Quillette is saying it's unrelated and he left weeks ago, but they happen to be announcing it today, which just sounds weird also. Like, it all is weird.
Yeah, it is bizarre. Well, what was the conclusion from the whole thing in your special?
Oh, that this is not that it's yet another person heralded by the right as a martyr and someone doing great things who seems to actually be a horribly bad faith actor that makes the right-wing movement look even worse, if you can imagine that.
Do you see elements of Antifa being in any way the way that he characterizes them as? Or I guess most of the right, I mean, even the president of the United States by this point now.
Listen, Antifa is so small that I hesitate to even talk about it as a defined group. I am against fascism as an individual. I am against violence. I'm against using authoritarian or violent tactics to try to make my political views a reality. So I feel like way too much time is spent on Antifa, quite frankly.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, I'm not asking you this because I want you to like throw shade or say things that'll get you in trouble, but I am curious about, I mean, I'm guessing you have a personal relationship with Joe Rogan, but what do you think, like from my personal perspective, and obviously I've made a couple of the viral videos on Joe Rogan, so obviously I might be a little bit biased in this, but I've kind of seen this descent into the intellectual dark web pipeline from him, right? Where his guests have become more and more frequently members of the intellectual dark web. The conversations that he has usually center around topics that they also like to parrot, such as being, you know, mildly to transphobic, right? Anywhere on that spectrum, stuff like that. Do you think that Joe has he become more right wing as a result of this? Do you think that like your appearance on his show was particularly fascinating to me, because it was the first time I saw someone not only push back on every one of these right wing talking points, but kind of dissect them, right? Like it was really interesting to see. So what are your thoughts on that subject?
So a few things. One, I agree that he has a lot of the guests that you're describing, but I actually don't know that it's been more frequent recently. I feel like recently it's been a lot more pop culture and sports and other stuff. I mean, I know he had the Crenshaw on during, I think it was during my vacation, but it's been more and more of the non-political stuff that I've seen. But needless to say, you are right that when it is political current event stuff, it tends to be people from the sort of intellectual dark website. I have no problem saying exactly what I said to him on his program, which is I think that it is a completely fair criticism of his style that you lend credibility in some degree, not only by how you handle your guests, but also by the ideological makeup of your guests. If you overwhelmingly have guests from one side of the political spectrum and your approach is that you don't challenge them head on, then to your audience, whatever your intention is, you're still lending credibility more to one political ideology than another. And I said that to him on the program, and people can disagree based on interview style. The one thing I do, so I also said when I got back from being on his show, in my conversations with him off air, and he says this on the show, and often people are like, that doesn't seem true. He seems like a left-wing guy to me who also is in the sort of, how to describe the culture, like, I don't know what I would call the cultural area, that space that his audience occupies, but it is an audience that, absent really specific explanations of why a lot of these right-wing talking points are wrong, they sort of default to like a center-right nationalist talking point, because it just sort of like seems kind of logical until you have someone present it to you in a different perspective, which is what I tried to do when I was there. But my personal conversations with him were like, this is a guy who seems pretty left on most issues, particularly social stuff. And I get that it doesn't really seem to come through on his show.
Well, for me, he strikes me as libertarian, right? And with most libertarians, I usually kind of agree with about 50% of what they say. Like on one end, he'll be like, we should end the drug war. And I'm like, oh, that's a positive thing. And on the other end, you know, he'll say something that's, you know, borderline transphobic. And I'm like, oh, that's unfortunate as well, right? It kind of goes back and forth.
And I think that a lot of that stuff that's like the I feel like there's a lot of bro sports culture that is combined with like so when we say libertarian, you could be talking about like a right libertarian, and that's a very specific thing. But I actually see him more as like a left libertarian who is part of this bro culture that is not fully there on a lot of the stuff that you're talking about in terms of like the language that's used around a lot of these issues. But the impression I came away with that the ideology that Joe Rogan lends credibility to on his show does not actually line up with his personal politics necessarily.
Oh, interesting.
I could be wrong. I mean, it was just my perception of the guy.
Yeah. That would be a good way, I guess, to kind of move us into the political spectrum then, because I mean, you said it a couple times on your show, and I've seen that episode where you're like, I just took the political compass test. People have accused me of being like a liberal or being a centrist when I'm clearly further to the left than that, and you can see it in this political chart. Where do you define yourself as?
I define myself as, I mean, I don't know if you want to. I'm a social democrat. I'm for social capitalism. I'm to the right as traditionally defined from a communist or a socialist. But you know, Joe Biden is well to my right. Hillary Clinton is well to my right. Barack Obama's to my right. I'm kind of in that space. Yeah, that's the way I'd place myself.
Where of all the political candidates, which one do you think you'd be voting for? You don't have to say who you'd vote for, but like which ones are closer aligned to your...
I'm a Bernie Warren guy, and you know, every time I do a test on a web, like I side with, weirdly said that I was aligned with Kirsten Gillibrand because she's a socialist and I'm a socialist. So I don't think that that's really a very good test. But most of the other ones put me basically mostly with Bernie and Warren, and I those are probably my top two candidates in the primary.
And your background's in economics, right?
Undergraduate, I did economics and communication, and then I have an MBA in entrepreneurship and financial planning, oddly enough.
Okay, so maybe this would be interesting because we could get to this discussion and you can come at it from the perspective of someone who actually knows a lot about economics, because I don't know a lot about economics. What is it about pushing as far left as, say, social democracy, where obviously I think you want a large welfare state to exist, right? But at the same time, you still want that to exist within the frameworks of capitalism. How do you justify that?
Here's my general philosophy, and then I'm glad to dig into any piece. So if I zoom out and I look at sort of like human existence, modern humans have been around for 250,000 years. More modern societies have been around for a couple thousand years. The most modern versions have been around for a few hundred years. Okay. Right. Basically, my view is that the great advancements that have led to technological advancement, modern agriculture, extended lifespans, reductions of infant mortality, etc., have happened under the general framework of what we call capitalism. Now, an immediate counter to that would be, well, they could have happened under other frameworks as well. That may be, but they didn't. They happened under the framework of capitalism. But with almost any good comes some bad. So like one example would be agriculture. Agriculture developed around the premise of private ownership and accumulation and manipulation of resources, including land and others. And it was one of the major advancements for humans.
About 10,000 years ago.
With it came sedentary lifestyles, inequality started, disease because larger communities were spot for longer periods of time. So it was a big advancement as a result of basically what is essentially a capitalist structure with new problems that have to be figured out. And so we can apply that to industrialization. We can apply that to whatever you want to apply it to. So my framework basically is we want to try to capture as many of the advantages of capitalism, but I support a social capitalism where we recognize that those advancements are actually built on public education, the commons, so many other shared resources that we need to make sure that no one is getting left behind by that system. And that's basically how, like, as a 2-minute explanation
of course,
of how I end up as a social democrat.
Right. And that's eloquent. So I'm gonna guess you've read Guns, Germs, and Steel, right?
I have read it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's where I heard the most of that kind of basis, where the agricultural revolution is obviously a foundational start for the exploration of how capitalism led us down this path, right? In Guns, Germs, and Steel, though, in that same book, it also talks about how that region of the world, especially Eurasia, had the Fertile Crescent, right? And that region of the world also made it particularly poised to be able to be successful in something like the agricultural revolution as compared to other countries. So there's there's an advantage to where and who you're born, obviously, right? In that situation.
No question.
Okay. Taking that and reducing it down to something just like the concept of, you cannot choose, obviously, where and who you're born, correct?
No doubt.
And so under the capitalist system, there is the inheritance of money from one generation to the next. Also, you'd agree with that, right? We pass wealth down.
There is inheritance, yes.
Yes. Like capital passes down from one generation to the next, right?
Yes. No
so,
doubt.
So based on those two things, then, it would automatically set up a class struggle, correct? Between...
That's right, yeah. So, I mean, I think you can think about it on a spectrum. So that reality, which is a reality that you're pointing out,
right?
On the full free market capitalist side, the perspective would be, that's right, the capital passes down. It should pass down with no taxation at all, would be like the most extreme view. Because if one person earns it, they earned it, they pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, and it should be passed down in full to the next person. The full opposite side of the political spectrum would say all of that was actually earned through the commons and by virtue of chance and where someone was born and the position in society that they were lucky enough or by odds ended up occupying. And none of it should be passed down. Mm-hmm. And the social democracy view would be, well, let's not ignore mm-hmm. that in addition to the sort of chance of where you were born and the resources that you have access to, mm-hmm. There is also they're part of what the outcomes are determined by is what mm-hmm. one person does, but we don't want to ignore the fact that it is also built on chance and location and timing, as you're pointing out. So there should be inheritance tax. It shouldn't be 100%, but there should be significant inheritance. So
you want a really large capital,
some piece of that,
right? Which is social democracy, essentially. You want to have, exactly. a large capital gains tax as well. I'm sure that kind of idea. But then, if you take capitalism and take it to the point where we are today, right, where we now have, especially with the manifestation of corporations, for example, where they have fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to demonstrate profit. We have endless growth on a planet with finite resources, and now we end up with, say, the problem we have today with carbon emissions, right? Which boil down to what? 100 companies are responsible for something like 70% of all CO2 emissions. Do you feel that these aren't inherent to the system itself, the system that kind of demands endless growth on a planet with finite resources? Or do you still feel that this is something that can be corrected, that we can fix?
I think that it can be in great part corrected, but not completely. And that's where there's a question mark around, is it going to be technology that can allow us to correct it completely? Is it going to be democratization of the workplace, which I'm totally okay with as a social democrat, even though often you would hear of that only under socialism.
Well, that furthers it. Yeah.
So I guess my point is the modern United States capitalism is certainly not my ideal as a social democrat. So certainly if you're pointing out one of the many problems with modern United States capitalism, I'm right there with you.
So I overheard you say that you would be for extending democracy to the workplace, then giving workers rights in the sense that they could have voting power in their companies, or do you want them to actually have ownership within their companies as well?
So the way that I've approached this is I am not for the government mandating that all companies need to be organized as co-ops with ownership distributed among all employees. So I find that to be an authoritarian implementation of socialism.
Right.
And I would not be in favor of that. That being said, I'm fine incentivizing or subsidizing companies, potentially companies above a certain size, to choose to do that. I'm for worker representation on boards of large corporations. You know, we could kind of run down the list.
But do you feel like they actually would? Like, I could never see Amazon suddenly being like, let's do the right thing.
A company of Amazon size would likely do it if they were successfully shamed into it such that it became something that carried like a PR benefit, sort of like their $15. I think that ended up being, they take credit for it, like they were doing the right thing. They were kind of shamed into it, and they probably got a pretty significant PR benefit from doing it.
Well, they did until people found out that didn't they use that to erode a lot of the workers' rights they already had, such as like benefits?
Yeah, and I think that they also go out of the way to use a lot of contractors rather than employees. If I recall correctly, the $15 minimum wage only applies to actual W-2 employees.
Okay. But then even then, an example like that, a company like Amazon, I mean, they've gotten to the point in the United States, they don't even pay taxes. And that to me seems completely natural, because again, if I was a board member and I wanted to increase the profits of my company to demonstrate it to people, that's what I would do. I would be doing everything in the self-interest of increasing my own personal profit, at the expense of the world, like everything else.
I think these are separate issues though, like the taxation representation on boards, or, I mean, certainly, but I think sometimes it's appealing to kind of just throw them all together and say all of these issues would be solved by X. But a lot of these, like the taxation issue, is really a fundamentally different one than some of the other ones we're talking about, which by the way, Amazon should not be paying zero taxes, to be clear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thank you for going down the theory rabbit hole with me. So is there anything that would push you further to the left in respect to all this? Like if you, like, I guess you've seen the statistics on worker cooperatives. You understand they have the same like birth rate and death rate than most other companies. And you've seen how like examples of that can flourish. Like the 5th largest corporation in Spain, I believe, is a worker controlled and co-owned company, right? So you'd be okay with that, but you'd want people to allow themselves to start those things organically. Like you just don't want it to be a necessity imposed on by the government kind of thing.
That is generally speaking correct.
Yeah. Okay. Generally speaking, I was like, what part did I mess up?
That's my general view. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. That's interesting. On a totally side note, like totally switching gears, where do you see yourself? Like, what is the next evolution of Pakman? Like, what are we going to see? Are you going to continue on the YouTube? You're going to become a full-time Twitcher? Like, what's in the future?
I don't see Twitch being a full-time thing, but basically I'm going to continue what it seems that the audience is getting out of it. So the first 6 weeks on Twitch have been great. We picked up I think it's about 15,000 followers, and the live streams are doing fairly well. And it's like, if this is after 6 weeks, if we can continue on even like half that rate of growth in a year, Twitch will be a really big piece of my business. If for whatever reason it implodes or I get myself banned or whatever, then I'll have to, kind of reconsider. But my idea is to continue diversifying. I don't want to be, during Adpocalypse 2017, the hardest hit people were those that had not really diversified their platforms and revenue sources. And that really rattled me. And I was glad that I had the membership program that I have at the time. So my priority is continue to grow all platforms on which there seems to be potential. This is crazy, but I'm even exploring TikTok. I've been reading that it sounds insane, but that I should be exploring TikTok, and now we're doing it. And I'm willing to go to whatever platform is sort of like a logical place for growth.
Strange new places.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, and did you see Bernie winning the primary? Because you're more tapped into politics, American politics, than I am.
I don't know. I mean, listen, it's Biden's been the presumptive front runner, and April, I think it is.
Yeah.
But every debate, he loses support.
Every time he speaks, he loses support.
Every time he speaks, he loses support, and he's going to have to keep speaking at some point. So there's 2 new polls that show him in a statistical 3-way tie with Bernie and Warren. I think at a certain point, it's clear that the progressive movement in the Democratic Party is solid now. If you add Bernie and Warren together, you've got between 35 and 40% support for the 2 of them. At a certain point, there will be some question as to whether they're getting in each other's way. Although it's important to understand that the second choice candidates for Bernie and Warren are not Warren and Bernie respectively, and that there's a lot of like demographic stuff going on. So I don't know. I mean, I think that he's clearly in it, and he's got a way better shot than he did in 2016, where it was clear that the DNC was just not going to let it happen.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy what you just watched and now crave more nectar of the damned? Did you know that if you're watching on YouTube, you're only getting half the surfy experience? We upload all of our content commercial and censorship free to our Patreon. Due to the general demonetization of our videos, we now upload half of our original content directly to those who can help us produce this show. Want even more nectar than that? Well, come join us at twitch.tv/TheSerfsTV, where we do weekly live streams, debates, interviews, AMAs, and more. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can help support our show 100% free by subscribing to our Twitch channel. So come join us, be merry, and know that your support is helping us do great things. Like pay rent and eat.
Someone else asked, what's the litigation situation with the Majority Report?
I've retained George Zimmerman.
Yeah.
And he is going to be representing. Currently looking for I'm looking for a big settlement. What's crazy is everyone assumes Sam is suing me, but I'm counter-suing actually.
We worship at the altar of Miranda Marone. We'd like to thank you so much for being the official sponsor of the Serfs, and everyone please go check out her SoundCloud and listen to her music and help her, because she is helping us.
We would like to thank our Lord Ricky Pilgrim. You are the pillar of our entire organization.
We'd also like to thank our knights, Josh Mickelson, Schizosaurus, Dr. Zayas, Dylan Burt, Andrea Lynn Epperly, Daniel Kahn, Angela, Jed Lewis, Terry, Todd Buckingham, Beck Hewitt, Todd Lajeunesse, Clement Chutzkoff, Cooper Pilot, Fairtan, Josh Mickelson, and Paul Parfait.